I was standing in the bedroom I paid for, staring at my husband as he quietly asked me to put his mother's name on my house deed. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt completely erased. Have you ever worked tirelessly to build a safe haven, only to have the people you love most try to tear it away? Tell me your story in the comments below, and please subscribe.
But to fully understand how I ended up changing the locks and leaving my mother-in-law's bags on the porch, we have to go back to before the storm arrived.
I stood in the living room of my beautiful 2-story house, running my fingers over the polished mahogany dining table. I bought this house with my own hard-earned money, 3 years before I even met Leo. Working late nights as a freelance graphic designer, saving every penny, and skipping vacations, it all paid off when I finally held the keys to my dream home. When Leo and I got married 6 months ago, it only made sense for him to move in with me. We were blissfully happy, building our life together in the sanctuary I have created. He was a kind, gentle man, though perhaps a little too eager to please his family. I never thought that trait would threaten my peace. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, expecting a package. Instead, I opened the front door to find a mountain of vintage floral luggage. Behind it stood my mother-in-law, Mrs. Clara, holding a dripping umbrella and wearing a smug smile. "Surprise, darling," she announced, marching past me without waiting for an invitation. She wiped her muddy boots vigorously on my pristine white welcome mat. "Leo said you had plenty of space, so I decided to move in. The countryside was getting far too lonely." My heart dropped into my stomach. Leo had said nothing to me about this. "Move in?" I stammered, closing the door as the chill of the storm swept into my hallway. "For how long?" Mrs. Clara chuckled, a sharp, grating sound, as she began inspecting my living room decor with a critical eye. "Oh, permanently, of course. A mother belongs with her son." I felt a sudden, suffocating tightness in my chest. That evening, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. When Leo finally came home from his office, I pulled him immediately into the kitchen, shutting the door behind us. "Did you know about this?" I whispered fiercely, my hands trembling. "Did you invite your mother to live with us without asking me?" Leo rubbed the back of his neck, unable to meet my gaze. "She called me yesterday crying, Maya. She said she felt isolated. I just told her she could visit for a bit. I swear, I didn't know she packed her entire life into those suitcases." He looked so exhausted, so torn between being a good son and a supportive husband. But my empathy was quickly overshadowed by a rising panic. "A visit is one thing, Leo, but she told me she's staying permanently," I argued, keeping my voice low so Mrs. Clara wouldn't hear us from the guest room. Over the next few days, the visit rapidly morphed into an absolute takeover. Mrs. Clara didn't just occupy the guest room, she occupied my entire life. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets so I couldn't find my own coffee mugs. She replaced my subtle vanilla candles with overpowering, headache-inducing lavender potpourri. Every time I tried to gently establish a boundary, she would dramatically sigh and complain to Leo about how unwelcome she felt in her son's home. "Her son's home," I muttered to myself one evening while washing dishes. The phrase stung like a physical slap. I had paid the down payment. I paid the mortgage. I loved Leo, but this house was mine. The emotional toll of constantly biting my tongue was exhausting. I felt like a stranger walking on eggshells in my own sanctuary. The breaking point arrived exactly 2 weeks after Mrs. Clara's uninvited arrival. I had spent a grueling 10 hours at the office, pitching a major design campaign. All I wanted was to come home, take a warm shower, and collapse into the familiar comfort of my bed. When I opened the front door, the house was suspiciously quiet. Leo was still at work, and Mrs. Clara was nowhere to be seen. I trudged upstairs, untying my hair, craving the serene, minimalist oasis of my master bedroom. I turned the doorknob, pushed the door open, and stopped dead in my tracks. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. My elegant, pale gray duvet had been stripped away, replaced by a loud, ruffled, aggressively pink floral bedspread. My carefully curated bedside lamps were gone, swapped for heavy brass monstrosities. Worst of all, the beautiful abstract painting I had commissioned for our anniversary was sitting on the floor, replaced by a massive, framed portrait of Mrs. Clara and Leo from his high school graduation. Tears of sheer frustration and disbelief pricked my eyes. My chest heaved. I walked into the room, my hands shaking as I touched the hideous pink fabric. This wasn't just a difference in interior design taste. This was a deliberate, calculated invasion of my most intimate space. She was marking her territory. "Do you like it?" Mrs. Clara's voice chirped from the doorway. She stood there, holding a cup of tea, looking immensely pleased with herself. It felt so cold and impersonal before. I thought I'd add a mother's warm touch. "You have no right to touch my things," I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed, heavy emotion.
Mrs. Clara's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of exaggerated theatrical offense. "Excuse me?" she gasped, clutching an imaginary pearl necklace at her throat. "I spend all afternoon making this room look like a proper marital bedroom for my son, and this is the thanks I get? You are incredibly ungrateful, Maya." "Ungrateful?" I spun around, my voice finally rising above a whisper. "This is my house, Clara. This is my bedroom. You are a guest here. You do not get to throw away my belongings and redecorate my private space." She scoffed, taking a step into the room, her eyes flashing with a cold, hard defiance I hadn't seen before. "Your house? Please. You are married to my son now. What belongs to him belongs to you, and what belongs to you belongs to him. Frankly, it's insulting that your name is the only one on the deed." The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I stared at her, my mind racing to process her words. "How do you know whose name is on the deed?" She waved a dismissive hand. "I asked Leo, of course. And I told him it needs to be rectified immediately. As the man of the house, his name should be on that paper. In fact, to truly secure our family's future, my name should be added as well." I felt physically sick. The sheer audacity of her demand echoed in my ears. She didn't just want a place to stay, she wanted to take ownership of my life's work. I looked at the hideous pink bedspread, then back at her cold, calculating eyes. In that moment, a switch flipped inside me. "Get out of my room," I said, my voice dangerously calm. When Leo finally returned home from work that evening, the heavy silence in the house immediately tipped him off. I was sitting on the living room sofa, my arms crossed, staring blankly at the wall. Clara had retreated to her guest room after our argument, likely waiting for her son to come to her defense. "Maya, is everything okay?" Leo asked hesitantly, loosening his tie as he approached me. I looked up, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Your mother wants her name on the deed to my house, Leo, and she said she discussed it with you." Leo's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. He sat down heavily on the coffee table opposite me, burying his face in his hands. "She brought it up yesterday. I told her it wasn't a good time to talk about it." "Not a good time?" I echoed, my voice breaking. "You didn't flat out tell her absolutely not? You didn't defend my hard work, my savings, my property? I was just trying to keep the peace, Maya," he pleaded, reaching for my hands, but I pulled them away. "You know how she gets. She just wants to feel secure, like she's a real part of this family. Maybe adding just my name wouldn't be the worst idea?" Just to calm her down? My heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I stared at the man I had married,
suddenly realizing he was more terrified of his mother's tantrums than he was of breaking my heart. The betrayal wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, suffocating realization that in this marriage, I was standing completely alone to protect myself. "I am going to sleep in the guest office tonight," I whispered, walking away. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, a sharp contrast to the dark storm clouds brewing inside my heart. I had barely slept, agonizing over the state of my marriage. When I finally emerged from the downstairs office, the house smelled of burnt toast and Clara's overpowering perfume. She was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping her coffee with an air of absolute triumph. In her mind, she had won. Leo had left for work early, cowardly avoiding the tension, leaving me alone with her. "Morning, Maya," Clara chirped, adjusting her silk robe. "I have a very busy day today. I'm heading out to the premium salon downtown for a full spa treatment, hair, and nails. I won't be back until late afternoon." "Enjoy your day," I said, keeping my voice impeccably neutral. I poured myself a glass of water, refusing to engage in her psychological games. "I will," she said smoothly. "Oh, and since I'll be exhausted when I get back, please have a roast chicken prepared for dinner, the way my Leo likes it." She didn't wait for an answer. She simply grabbed her designer purse, gave me one last patronizing smile, and walked out the front door. The lock clicked shut behind her, echoing loudly in the quiet house. I stood frozen in the kitchen for a full 5 minutes, listening to the sound of her taxi pulling away. The silence that followed was golden, sweet, and immensely clarifying. I looked around at the subtle changes she had forced upon my sanctuary: the moved vases, the replaced rugs, the lingering scent of lavender. A profound sense of resolve washed over me. The time for being a polite, accommodating daughter-in-law was officially over. The moment I was certain Clara's taxi was gone, I sprinted up the stairs. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt incredibly focused, driven by a primal need to reclaim my safe space. I marched straight into her guest room and hauled out the giant vintage floral suitcases she had arrived with just weeks ago. I began to pack. I wasn't careless. I meticulously folded her clothes, neatly arranged her endless bottles of lotions and perfumes, and securely zipped every bag. I carried them down the stairs one by one, piling them neatly by the front door. Next, I headed to my master bedroom. With immense satisfaction, I stripped the hideous pink ruffled bedspread off my bed, folded it tightly, and shoved it into her last remaining duffel bag. I took down the massive framed portrait of her and Leo from my wall, carefully wrapping it in a protective blanket, and placed it gently on top of her luggage pile. I retrieved my soft gray duvet from the closet, smoothed it over my mattress, and took a deep, grounding breath. My bedroom was mine again. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I dragged the heavy suitcases out onto the covered front porch. I lined them up perfectly, ensuring they were protected from any potential rain. Every piece of luggage I moved felt like a heavy weight lifting off my shoulders. For years, I had worked myself to the bone to afford this home, to create a peaceful environment. I was not going to let anyone, not even my husband's mother, bully me out of the security I had built with my own 2 hands. I closed the front door, looking at the empty entryway, and finally smiled. With the bags outside, there was only one crucial step left. I picked up my phone and dialed the local locksmith. Thankfully, he was available for an emergency house call. Within 30 minutes, a friendly man in a blue uniform arrived. He didn't ask questions as he swiftly removed the old brass cylinders from my front, back, and garage doors, replacing them with brand new, heavy-duty locks. As I handed him my credit card, I felt a twinge of guilt try to creep into my mind, but I quickly pushed it away. This wasn't cruelty. This was a desperately needed boundary. I was protecting my home, my finances, and my mental health. After the locksmith left, I sat on my pristine living room sofa. The house was exactly as it had been before the intrusion: quiet, calm, and undeniably mine. I pulled out my phone and sent a short text message to Leo. "Please come home at 4 p.m. today. It is an absolute emergency. Do not be late. I watched the clock tick on the wall. Clara's salon appointment was supposed to end around 4:30. The timing would be tight, but I needed Leo here to witness the consequences of his inaction. He needed to see that his failure to protect our marriage had forced my hand. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, wrapped my hands around my favorite ceramic mug, and sat by the front window. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as a familiar yellow taxi slowly turned onto our quiet suburban street. The moment of truth had finally arrived. The yellow taxi idled smoothly by the curb. Clara stepped out, her hair perfectly coiffed, a look of relaxed indulgence glowing on her face. She paid the driver, turned toward the porch, and completely froze. From my vantage point behind the living room curtains, I watched the color rapidly drain from her cheeks as she processed the mountain of vintage floral luggage stacked neatly by the front door. She marched up the steps, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete. She grabbed the brass doorknob, twisting it violently. It didn't budge. She dug frantically into her designer purse, pulling out the silver spare key Leo had given her, and jammed it into the keyhole. It wouldn't turn. Panic and pure fury warred on her face. She began pounding her fist against the heavy wooden door, her rings clacking loudly against the timber. "Maya, open this door immediately. The lock is jammed," she yelled, her shrill voice piercing right through the thick wood. I remained seated on the sofa, gripping my coffee mug in the quiet safety of my home. My hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but from the raw adrenaline of finally standing my ground. Just as Clara raised her fist to pound again, a familiar silver sedan pulled swiftly into the driveway. Leo had received my emergency text. He practically leaped out of his car, his work tie askew, his eyes darting frantically from his mother's enraged face to the massive pile of luggage on the porch. "Mom, what is going on?" he asked, completely breathless. Clara spun around, pointing a manicured, trembling finger at the house. "Your ungrateful wife has locked me out, Leo. She packed my bags like a common criminal." Leo jogged up the porch steps, his expression a painful mix of utter confusion and deep embarrassment. "Mom, just calm down. Let me try," he muttered, pulling his own keychain from his pocket. He slid his familiar key into the deadbolt and tried to turn it. When it hit a solid, unyielding barrier, he stopped abruptly. He tried again, jiggling the heavy handle. "Maya," he called out, his voice laced with sudden anxiety. "Maya, my key isn't working. Are you in there?" I set my coffee mug down on the glass table. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked directly to the entryway, and slowly turned the new latch, pulling the door open just enough to see them. I stood firmly in the threshold, acting as a physical, unmovable barrier between my sanctuary and their chaotic demands. "The locks have been changed, Leo," I stated calmly, looking him directly in the eye. "No one enters this house without my explicit permission ever again." Clara let out a theatrical gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically wounded. "Leo, do you hear her? She is treating your own mother like a feral stray. You need to put a stop to this disrespect instantly." Leo looked completely and utterly overwhelmed. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "Why would you do this? We can talk about the deed later, I promise. Just let my mom inside. The neighbors are starting to stare." "We aren't talking about the deed, Leo, because there is nothing to discuss," I replied, my voice unwavering. "This is my home. Your mother is no longer welcome to live here. Her bags are packed. I suggest you help her load the car." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and heavy. The soft rustle of the afternoon wind through the neighborhood trees suddenly felt deafening. Clara stared at me, her mouth opening and closing in sheer disbelief. She was waiting for her son to assert his supposed authority, to overrule my boundary, and invite her back inside my home. Leo looked agonizingly back and forth between us, the crushing weight of his dual loyalties finally paralyzing him. "Maya," he whispered, stepping closer to the door, his eyes pleading for a compromise I was no longer willing to give. "You're humiliating her. You're humiliating me. Can't we just step inside and discuss this like rational adults?"
"I was rational when I begged you to talk to her," I replied, my voice steady despite the painful knot tightening in my throat. "I was rational when she took over my kitchen and when she replaced my personal belongings. But demanding my home? That crossed a line you refused to defend. I had to defend it myself." Clara scoffed loudly, tears of pure, unadulterated anger welling in her eyes.
"Fine," she spat out, her voice venomous. "If this is how you treat family, I don't want to step foot in your cursed house anyway. Leo, take me to a hotel, right now." She turned on her heel and marched proudly toward his car. Leo looked completely defeated. He looked back at me, a profound, heavy sadness in his eyes. "You didn't have to do it this way, Maya," he said softly. He didn't wait for my response. He turned, grabbed 2 of the heaviest suitcases, and began hauling them down the driveway. I stood in the doorway, watching them drive away. I closed the front door and locked the new deadbolt, the solid metallic click echoing loudly through the empty hallway. The house was finally mine again. It was perfectly quiet, neatly arranged, and entirely free from the suffocating, artificial scent of lavender potpourri. Yet, as I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, the silence I had so desperately craved just hours ago now felt oppressive and incredibly heavy. I sank into a chair at the dining table, resting my forehead against the cool mahogany wood. The protective adrenaline that had fueled my bold actions all day was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind an exhausting, sweeping wave of sorrow. I had successfully protected my financial security and reclaimed my personal sanctuary, but at what ultimate cost? I genuinely loved Leo. When we stood at the altar 6 months ago, I truly believed we were building a united, unbreakable partnership. But today, the fragile foundation of our marriage had cracked wide open. He hadn't stood up for me when it mattered most. He had repeatedly chosen the path of least resistance, allowing his mother's absurd entitlement to trample over my basic boundaries. Tears, hot and bitter, finally spilled over my eyelashes and fell onto the table. I wasn't crying because Clara was gone. I was weeping for the man I thought my husband was. The heartbreaking realization that he lacked the emotional strength to be my true partner in adversity was devastating. As the sun began to set, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a short text from Leo. "I checked her into a hotel. I need some time to think. I'm staying with her tonight." My dream home had never felt so vast, and I had never felt so entirely alone. I woke up to the harsh morning light streaming through the bedroom window. For a fleeting second, I reached across the mattress, expecting to feel the familiar warmth of my husband. Instead, my hand met cold, empty sheets. The events of the previous day came crashing down on me like a heavy tidal wave. Leo had actually stayed at the hotel with his mother. I dragged myself out of bed, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I went through the motions of my morning routine, brewing coffee, taking a shower, getting dressed for work, but my mind was a million miles away. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale and exhausted. At the office, I stared blankly at my design drafts. My coworkers chatted happily about their weekend plans, completely oblivious to the domestic storm tearing my life apart. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a call, an apology, anything from Leo. But the screen remained devastatingly dark. By lunchtime, I made a firm, agonizing decision. I would not text him first. I refused to beg for a basic level of respect that should have been guaranteed the day we exchanged our vows. If Leo truly valued our marriage, he needed to be the one to bridge this gap. He needed to prove that I was his priority, not merely an afterthought to his mother's unreasonable demands. I spent the evening sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by old photo albums. Looking at our wedding pictures, my heart ached with a profound, hollow sadness. I loved the man smiling in those photos, but I desperately needed a partner who could protect me, not just stand by while my sanctuary was invaded. 2 days passed without a single word. On the third evening, I was reheating some leftover pasta when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My breath caught in my throat. I watched through the kitchen window as Leo stepped out of his silver sedan. He looked completely worn out. His shoulders were slumped and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. I unlocked the front door just as he reached the porch. We stood there, an ocean of unspoken hurt separating us. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough and incredibly quiet. "I just need to grab some clean clothes for work." I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. He walked past me, and I noticed he didn't try to touch my arm or kiss my cheek. He headed straight upstairs, while I remained rooted in the hallway, my chest aching. When he came back down, holding a small duffel bag, he lingered heavily by the door. "The hotel is difficult," he muttered, staring blankly at the floorboards. "My mother has been complaining nonstop. She wants me to hire a lawyer to force you to add us to the deed." The sheer audacity of her plan sent a fresh wave of shock through my system. "And what did you tell her, Leo?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading sorrow. "I told her no, Maya. I finally told her absolutely not. But she just won't listen. She cries and accuses me of abandoning her." "You haven't abandoned her," I replied softly, crossing my arms to guard my breaking heart. "But you have abandoned me." The pain in Leo's eyes was undeniable, yet it wasn't enough to instantly heal the deep fracture in our marriage. He stood by the front door, gripping the strap of his duffel bag so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "I'm sorry, Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own guilt. "I'm so incredibly sorry. I've been a coward. I just wanted everyone to be happy, but I ended up destroying the one thing that matters most." His apology felt sincere, genuine, and desperately needed. A small part of me wanted to throw my arms around his neck, tell him everything was forgiven, and pull him back into the warmth of our home. But the larger, more rational part of my brain held me firmly back. Love alone could not fix the fundamental lack of boundaries in our relationship. "An apology is a start, Leo," I said carefully, maintaining my physical distance. "But sorry doesn't change the fact that I don't feel safe with you right now. I don't feel protected." He nodded slowly, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. "What can I do? Please, tell me how to fix this." I took a deep, steadying breath. If we are going to save this marriage, things have to change radically. We need professional help. I want us to go to couples counseling, and your mother needs to return to her own home in the countryside. Leo swallowed hard, visibly processing the absolute finality of my terms. "Counseling," he echoed softly. "Okay, yes. If that's what it takes to win you back, I'll do it. I'll make the appointment tomorrow." He reached out, gently squeezing my hand before walking out the door into the night. True to his word, Leo sent me the details for a counseling appointment the very next afternoon. We agreed to meet at a quiet, independent coffee shop an hour before our scheduled session. Walking into the cafe, my stomach tied itself into anxious knots. I spotted him sitting at a small corner table, 2 steaming mugs of tea already waiting. He stood up nervously as I approached, awkwardly pulling out my chair. The familiar scent of his cologne brought an unexpected sting of tears to my eyes, a harsh reminder of the deep affection I still held for him. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly, wrapping his hands around his warm mug. "How is your mother?" I asked, keeping my tone completely neutral. Leo sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that seemed to pull from the absolute depths of his soul. She took a train back to the countryside this morning. I had to personally pack her bags and drive her to the station. She refused to speak to me the entire ride. A small flicker of relief ignited in my chest, but I remained cautious. You actually sent her home? I had to, he confessed, his gaze dropping to the wooden table. After I left your house the other night, I went back to the hotel. She had literally printed out a fake property transfer document she found online and demanded I sign it. That was my wake-up call, Maya. I suddenly saw her the way you do, not as a lonely mother, but as someone trying to actively steal our future. Hearing him finally validate my reality felt like a soothing balm over a raw, open wound. It was the first real step toward true healing. The therapy office was a neutral, calming space, painted in soft earth tones and smelling faintly of chamomile. Dr. Evans, a gentle but firm woman with kind eyes, listened intently as I poured out my heart. I didn't just talk about the house or the hideous pink bedspread. I talked about the profound, aching loneliness of being married to someone who wouldn't protect me. When Clara demanded my name be taken off my own property deed, I wasn't just losing a house, I explained, gripping a tissue in my lap. I felt like I was losing my dignity, and when Leo stood there and made excuses for her, I realized I was completely on my own in this marriage. Leo sat beside me on the plush sofa, his head bowed in deep shame. For the first time, he didn't try to interrupt or justify his actions. He simply listened to the raw, unfiltered pain in my voice. When it was his turn to speak, his voice trembled. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I see now that there was no peace. I was just transferring my mother's chaos onto Maya. I was so terrified of my mother's guilt trips that I sacrificed my wife's mental health. Hearing him say it out loud in front of a professional was incredibly validating. Dr. Evans nodded slowly, validating my feelings of betrayal while challenging Leo to confront his deeply ingrained fear of maternal disapproval. For the first time since Clara arrived with her vintage floral luggage, I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope. The road ahead would be long, but we were finally standing on the same path, looking at the same map. Over the next few weeks, couples counseling became our necessary weekly anchor. It wasn't a magical, instant cure. There were excruciating sessions that ended in tears and defensive arguments, but we both kept showing up. During our fourth session, Leo experienced a massive emotional breakthrough. When Dr. Evans pressed him about his inability to say no to Clara, he finally broke down. He explained that after his father passed away when he was just 10, his mother had leaned on him entirely. He had been conditioned for 2 decades to feel personally responsible for her emotional well-being. If she was unhappy, I felt like a failure as a son, Leo admitted, wiping away tears. When she showed up at our house, I panicked. I regressed into that scared 10-year-old boy trying to fix his mother's sadness. My heart ached for the immense, unfair burden he had carried since childhood. I reached out, gently placing my hand over his. "You are not responsible for her happiness, Leo," I said softly. "You are an adult. You are my husband. Caring for your mother doesn't mean enabling her toxic behavior." Doctor. Evans guided us through establishing firm, non-negotiable boundaries. We agreed that Clara was absolutely barred from showing up unannounced, and any discussions regarding our personal finances were strictly off-limits. Leo was finally learning the crucial difference between being a respectful son and being an independent man. The heavy resentment that had built up in my chest slowly began to melt away, replaced by a deep, empathetic understanding of the man I loved. It took 6 full weeks of intensive therapy before I felt truly comfortable inviting Leo to move back into the house. The evening he brought his luggage back inside, the atmosphere was completely different than before. He didn't just walk in. He stepped over the threshold with a profound sense of respect for the sanctuary we were trying to rebuild. We established new house rules. The spare room remained exactly as I had organized it, a quiet home office, free of aggressive floral patterns and suffocating lavender scents. More importantly, we instituted a policy of radical honesty. If something bothered us, we agreed to address it immediately, rather than letting it fester in the dark. The first few nights were admittedly awkward. Trust, once shattered, takes time to glue back together. I found myself hyper-vigilant, analyzing his phone calls and watching his reactions, but Leo proved himself through consistent, quiet actions. When Clara called one evening and began complaining about her neighbors, I heard Leo calmly but firmly cut the conversation short. "Mom, I love you, but I'm spending time with my wife right now." "I'll call you on Sunday," he said, hanging up the phone without apologizing. He walked into the kitchen, wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, and kissed the top of my head. "Just keeping my promises," he murmured. I leaned back into his embrace, closing my eyes. The empty, haunting silence that had plagued my home for weeks was gone, replaced by the warm, comforting hum of a genuine partnership. We were actively choosing each other, every single day. 2 months after the infamous lockout, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. The elegant, swirling handwriting on the front was unmistakably Clara's. My stomach did a familiar, anxious flip as I handed it to Leo over breakfast. He looked at the envelope, took a deep breath, and opened it right there at the dining table, ensuring completely transparent communication. He read the single page silently, his expression unreadable, before sliding it across the mahogany wood toward me. It wasn't an apology. Clara was too proud for that. Instead, it was a stiff, formally worded update about her garden in the countryside, her local bridge club, and the weather. But buried in the very last paragraph was a subtle, monumental shift in her tone. "I suppose you and Maya are very busy with your own lives," she wrote. "I have decided to renovate my own kitchen here. Since you clearly have your own household to manage, I won't expect you to visit until the holidays." It was as close to a surrender as we would ever get from her. She was finally acknowledging that our home was our domain, not an extension of hers. I looked up at Leo, waiting for his reaction. The old Leo might have felt guilty or rushed to call her. The new Leo simply folded the letter and took a sip of his coffee. "Well," he said with a small, relaxed smile, "looks like we have our holidays planned out. But until then, it's just you and me." I smiled back, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my heart. We had weathered the storm. My home was safe, my marriage was stronger, and my boundaries were finally permanently intact. As the months drifted by, the crisp autumn winds gave way to a gentle, quiet winter. Our home, once a battleground of passive-aggressive notes and hideous floral bedspreads, had fully transformed back into my ultimate sanctuary. But more importantly, the atmosphere between Leo and me had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer two individuals tiptoeing around each other's triggers. We were a fortified, united front. Counseling had stripped away the polite, superficial layers of our marriage, exposing the raw foundation beneath. We had done the hard, grueling work of rebuilding it with absolute honesty. Yet, as December rapidly approached, a quiet undercurrent of anxiety began to ripple through my mind. The holidays were looming, which meant it was time to fulfill the unspoken promise made months ago, visiting Clara in the countryside. It would be our very first face-to-face interaction since I packed her bags and changed my locks. One evening, while we were wrapping presents in the living room, Leo noticed my distant expression. He set down the roll of tape and gently placed his hand over mine. "You're thinking about the trip to my mother's house, aren't you?" he asked softly, reading my mind with an ease that still surprised me. I nodded, staring at the twinkling lights of our Christmas tree. "I'm just nervous, Leo. We've made so much progress. What if we walk through her front door and she instantly regresses? What if she demands to know about our finances or insults me again?" "Then we leave," Leo stated, his voice devoid of any hesitation. He looked me squarely in the eyes. "Maya, I am not going to let anyone disrespect my wife, not even my mother. You have all the power." The weekend of our scheduled visit arrived much faster than I anticipated. I spent Saturday morning meticulously packing my overnight bag, carefully selecting outfits that were comfortable yet impeccably polished. I wanted to project an aura of calm, unshakable confidence. I also purchased a beautiful, neutral gift for Clara, a set of handcrafted ceramic mixing bowls for her newly renovated kitchen. It was an olive branch, a mature gesture of goodwill that firmly maintained my personal boundaries. Before we loaded the luggage into Leo's car, he pulled me into the kitchen for a serious conversation. He had matured so much over the past few months. He no longer hid from difficult situations. He tackled them head-on. "Let's review our ground rules," he said, handing me a fresh cup of warm coffee. "We arrive at noon. If she brings up the house deed, I will give her one single warning. If she persists, we pack up and head straight back here. If she makes any passive-aggressive comments about your career or your cooking, I will immediately shut it down. Are we absolutely clear on this?" A profound wave of warmth spread through my chest. The terrified, people-pleasing boy I had briefly separated from was entirely gone. Standing in front of me was a fiercely protective partner. "We are clear," I smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. "But let's also remember to be graceful, Leo. She's your mother, and she is getting older. I don't want to fight with her. I just want a peaceful weekend." "Peaceful and respectful," he agreed, leaning in to gently kiss my forehead. "That's exactly what we are going to demand." With our strategy securely locked in, we drove toward the countryside. The drive to the countryside took just under 3 hours. As we pulled into Clara's gravel driveway, the picturesque cottage looked deceptively charming, completely covered in a fresh blanket of white snow. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs as I stepped out of the car. I clutched the beautifully wrapped box of ceramic mixing bowls tightly to my chest, using it as a physical shield. Before I could even knock, the heavy wooden front door swung wide open. Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. She looked slightly older, perhaps a bit more fragile than the imposing woman who had commandeered my master bedroom, but her sharp gaze remained entirely familiar. "Leo, Maya," she greeted us, her tone stiff and formal. It lacked her usual overbearing theatricality. "Come in before you freeze to death. Leave your snowy boots on the mat." We stepped into her cozy, dimly lit hallway. The tension in the air was incredibly thick, a silent acknowledgement of the massive, unaddressed conflict standing between us. I handed her the wrapped box. "We brought you a small gift, Clara, for your new kitchen renovations." She blinked, clearly surprised by the unexpected gesture. She took the box, carefully peeling back the paper to reveal the beautiful ceramics. A genuine, albeit small, smile touched the corners of her mouth. "These are very nice, Maya. Thank you. They will match the new countertops perfectly." It was a tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. As we moved into the living room, I noticed she had placed a framed photo of Leo and me from our wedding day prominently on the mantel. A fragile, unspoken truce had officially begun. Dinner that evening was a meticulously choreographed dance of polite, safe conversation. We discussed the snowy weather, the local bakeries, and Clara's thriving bridge club. Nobody mentioned real estate, house deeds, or interior decorating. It was undeniably superficial, but it was immensely peaceful. Halfway through the meal, Clara turned her sharp gaze directly toward me. I instinctively tensed, bracing myself for a veiled insult. "Leo mentioned that you received a major promotion at your design firm last month, Maya," she said, cutting her roast beef carefully. "Yes, I was promoted to senior art director," I replied cautiously, keeping my voice perfectly even. Clara set down her knife and fork, looking at me with an unreadable expression. Leo's father was a very ambitious man. He always valued hard work and financial independence. He would have highly respected your drive. She picked up her wine glass, taking a slow sip. It is a rare quality to find someone so determined to build their own security. I sat perfectly still, completely stunned. It was the closest thing to a direct compliment she had ever given me. She wasn't apologizing for her past actions, and she certainly wasn't admitting defeat, but she was finally acknowledging my strength. She recognized that the very independence she had tried to bulldoze was a respectable trait. I glanced across the table at Leo. He gave me a tiny, incredibly proud nod. We had survived the ultimate test. We hadn't needed to raise our voices or threaten to leave. By simply holding our ground and demanding basic respect, we had forced a healthy dynamic into existence. "Thank you, Clara," I said softly, meaning it from the bottom of my heart. For the first time, her house actually felt warm. The morning of our departure, the countryside was bathed in brilliant, crisp sunlight. We packed our bags, the heavy dread that had accompanied our arrival completely absent. Clara walked us to the car, her woolen shawl wrapped tightly against the winter chill. There were no emotional hugs or tearful goodbyes. That simply wasn't her style. Instead, she offered a brisk, respectful nod. "Drive safely, Leo. Maya, thank you again for the beautiful bowls," she said, her breath misting in the cold air. "We will. Take care of yourself, Clara," I replied, stepping into the passenger seat. As we pulled out of the snowy driveway, I watched her figure shrink in the rearview mirror until she disappeared behind a bend in the road. I let out a long, shuddering breath, feeling a profound, absolute sense of relief wash over my entire body. Leo reached across the center console, intertwining his fingers firmly with mine. "You did incredibly well this weekend," he murmured, keeping his eyes on the winding country road. "I'm so incredibly proud of you." "We both did well," I corrected gently, squeezing his hand. We acted as a team. That was the most important part. The 3-hour drive home felt infinitely shorter than the journey there. We listened to soft music, occasionally pointing out the snow-covered pine trees lining the highway. For the first time since the day Clara arrived with her mountain of vintage floral luggage, there was no lingering anxiety in my chest. The heavy, invisible storm clouds that had threatened to completely destroy our marriage had finally broken, leaving behind a clear, unblemished sky. We were going back to our sanctuary, and this time we were returning absolutely united. Monday morning arrived with a refreshing burst of creative energy. I stepped into my home office, the very room I had fiercely defended from becoming a lavender-scented guest room, and sat at my large mahogany desk. As a newly promoted senior art director, my workload had increased, but I welcomed the challenge. I booted up my computer and immediately launched CapCut to review the final renders of a massive new digital campaign. I was producing an atmospheric ASMR-style project for a major wellness brand. The screen filled with a highly realistic, high-quality looping video of heavy rain falling gracefully against a dark window pane, seamlessly transitioning into a serene, static camera snow scene. I adjusted the audio tracks, ensuring the water ripples and wind noises were perfectly suited for long-duration playback. Next, I shifted my attention to a secondary narrative project. It was a podcast-style visual format featuring an AI-generated character. To simplify the audio synchronization and reduce my heavy editing time, I strategically designed the scene so a large studio microphone partially obscured the character's face. The workflow was incredibly streamlined and efficient. As I meticulously tweaked the timeline, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. I had purchased this house entirely with the funds from late-night editing sessions just like this one. Every pixel, every rendered frame, and every carefully crafted loop represented my independence. Looking around the quiet, sunlit room, I knew that drawing that hard line with Clara wasn't just about preserving my furniture. It was about honoring the immense hard work that had built my career. I closed the software, a deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face as I successfully submitted the final files. That evening, Leo and I sat together on the living room rug, wrapped in my favorite soft gray duvet that I had rescued from Clara's luggage months ago. A gentle fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm dancing shadows across the pristine walls. We were enjoying a quiet, uneventful night, a stark and welcome contrast to the chaotic family drama that had defined our early marriage. Leo carefully set his tea mug on the glass coffee table and turned to look at me, his expression suddenly growing deeply serious. "I was thinking about the day you changed the locks," he said quietly, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "I was so angry and confused at the time. I thought you were being unnecessarily cruel." I stiffened slightly, bracing myself, but he quickly raised a reassuring hand to gently stroke my cheek. "But I realize now," he continued, his voice thick with genuine emotion, "that it was the most important thing you could have ever done for us. If you hadn't drawn that absolute, unmovable boundary, I would have eventually let my mother completely consume our lives. I would have let her push you right out of this house." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Hearing him finally articulate the exact fear that had haunted me during those dark, lonely nights was incredibly validating. "It broke my heart to lock you out, Leo," I whispered, leaning my head softly against his broad shoulder. "I never wanted to fight you. I just wanted you to stand beside me." He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me impossibly closer. "I am standing beside you now, Maya, and I promise you, I will never, ever step away again." Spring eventually arrived, melting the last remnants of the winter snow and bringing a vibrant, renewed energy to our quiet suburban street. The massive domestic drama that had nearly shattered our marriage now felt like a distant, surreal memory. The hideous pink ruffled bedspread was permanently gone, the suffocating scent of lavender was completely eradicated, and my name remained rightfully, solely, and proudly on the property deed. Our relationship with Clara settled into a functional, highly structured routine. We scheduled brief, polite phone calls every other Sunday, and we planned short, heavily boundaries visits for major holidays. She never again mentioned moving in, and she certainly never tried to redecorate my personal spaces from afar. The unspoken truce held firm because it was reinforced by mutual, unwavering respect. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I stood on the front porch, watering a collection of bright, newly planted hydrangeas. Leo was beside me, using a heavy-duty drill to install a brand-new decorative brass knocker on our front door, the very door I had locked against his mother so many months ago. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and stepped back to admire his handiwork. He smiled at me, a bright, genuine, and completely unburdened expression. "Looks perfect," he declared, wrapping an arm around my waist and pulling me into a warm, comfortable embrace. I leaned against his chest, looking at our beautiful, peaceful home. We had fought a difficult, exhausting battle to protect our marriage, but standing here in the golden afternoon sunlight, I knew with absolute certainty that the painful struggle had been worth it. The house was finally, completely, and undeniably ours. 1 year exactly from the day the locksmith arrived, Leo and I celebrated our first true anniversary of reclaiming our marriage. We decided to host a small, intimate dinner party in our home, inviting only our closest, most supportive friends. As I moved around my meticulously organized kitchen, preparing appetizers and arranging fresh flowers, the space felt completely saturated with joy and genuine laughter. The dining table, the same mahogany table where I had wept bitter tears over a cold, empty house, was now beautifully set with crisp linen napkins and elegant silverware. Leo was enthusiastically pouring wine for our guests, his face relaxed and glowing with happiness. The heavy, anxious weight of family obligations no longer dragged down his spirit. Later in the evening, as our friends gathered in the living room, Leo gently tapped his fork against his crystal wine glass. The room immediately quieted down. He turned to me, his dark eyes shining with immense gratitude. "I want to make a quick toast," he said, his voice steady and completely sincere. "To my incredible wife, Maya. This past year hasn't always been easy. We faced challenges that almost broke us, but your strength, your absolute unwavering dedication to the truth, and your fierce love saved this home." He raised his glass, holding my gaze from across the room. "You taught me what it truly means to be a partner, to stand together, no matter what storms try to break through the front door." My heart swelled until I thought it might burst. I raised my own glass, smiling through joyful tears.
The applause from our friends was warm and validating, a beautiful symphony replacing the chaotic silence of the past.
Long after our guests had departed and the house fell into a quiet, peaceful slumber, I walked slowly through the rooms of my home. I touched the cool, polished surface of the dining table, admired the soft gray duvet in the master bedroom, and lingered in the doorway of my meticulously arranged home office.
The walls of this house had witnessed my greatest solitary triumphs and my most painful marital betrayals. It had been an independent sanctuary, a battleground of bitter resentment, and finally, a crucible where a much stronger, more resilient marriage was painstakingly forged. I walked out onto the covered front porch, breathing in the cool, crisp night air. I looked down at the heavy, reinforced deadbolt on the door. I no longer saw it as a desperate, defensive barrier against a toxic mother-in-law. Instead, I saw it as a profound symbol of self-respect. It was the physical manifestation of my refusal to be diminished, silenced, or pushed out of my own life.
Leo stepped out onto the porch behind me, wrapping a warm blanket over my shoulders and pulling me tightly against his chest. I leaned back into his familiar embrace, listening to the steady, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat. "It's beautifully quiet tonight," he whispered into my hair. "It is," I agreed softly, closing my eyes and letting the absolute peace of the moment wash over me completely. I had bought this dream home with my own hard-earned money, but it took an uninvited guest, a mountain of vintage floral luggage, and the agonizing courage to change the locks for us to truly learn how to live in it. The storm was permanently over. We were finally home.